I'll just say that I'm so happy to be here with you, my oldest and dearest friend, Anjanashakya, and that everything that I have learned about Newar culture, which is probably one picky nail of an enormous body of knowledge, is learned in relationship. Nobody learns anything on their own, but in the context of wonderful, generative, exciting relationships, which has certainly been true of our friendship. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the research, the oral history research that I've done with Newar elders that might shed some light on this exhibit, concluding exhibit on Avalokiteshvara, but also on the next one on nature. And just wanted to say that these beautiful works of art, the sacred statues and the paintings and things that you see out the temples, the carvings are not just beautiful objects. They are portals or doorways to experiencing Newar religious values of tenderness and caring toward all beings. And of course, I want you to remember that this is not an academic paper at all, but a storytelling session, which I hope will inspire people to think of their own experiences and ideas afterwards. There will be a lot to add. Hopefully there'll be a little inspiration and you'll think of hundreds more examples of what I'm talking about. And today I'll be quoting two women in particular, Swayambhu Dyoma and Malini Ma. I was very happy that Malini Ma's family members could come to the presentation on Saturday and hope that they will be invited to many more such occasions. I want us to think together about how traditional Newars managed water in this beautiful valley. And the mechanics of how the water was brought, stored, and distributed are not what I will be talking about, wondrous and marvelous though that is, and worthy of a lot more further study. Instead, I'm talking about religious and symbolic beliefs about water that resulted in a thriving water cycle here with enough for all. So a little bit about me. I first came to Nepal as a child in 1970 when my father was the DCM in the American Embassy. We lived here for nearly 4 years. In those days, the Kathmandu Valley was incredibly green and radiant. I remember the vibrant rice fields coexisting with a vibrant cultural expression and religious life in the three cities of Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur. Life here was so beautiful and so exciting. I can only tell you that every day gave me shocks of happiness. I used to think, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. It was only later that I realized that all of the devotions to the gods, the temples and shrines, the jatras and the rituals were supported by the rice grain and other foods grown in the beautiful green fields right around us, and that the same people who were farming with such skills were also deep religious masters of Tantric Buddhism and Hinduism. When I first returned to Kathmandu in the 1980s, the green fields were already vanishing. At the same time, the sacred images of the gods, which I'll call dyas, the Newar word, were also disappearing, stolen from the temples and shrines to resurface later in museums and private collections abroad. I became worried that something precious to me was being lost, the Newar traditions that I associated with the well-being and happiness that I had felt here as a child. I started to seek out Newar elders, asking them questions and recording their stories. For many years, I focused on religious life, but then I realized that religious life here has always been entwined with the natural world and what I call Newar sacred farming. And so I decided to start interviewing elders about the way they had farmed. And that is exactly what I was doing on April 25th, 2015, when Nepal's huge earthquake struck. I was interviewing an elderly lady in Bhaktapur who was telling me about planting rice. The earthquake started with a small rattling, like a bumble bee buzzing in a jar. I thought maybe it was a water truck squeezing down the narrow gully and making everything shake, because now water is a problem in this Kathmandu Valley, with people often having to buy water that is brought in on trucks. But then the shaking got harder and harder. One of the things I remember most from that day was a tremendous roaring sound, louder than anything you could imagine. It was like a dragon in pain from deep within the earth. The earthquake sounded like a living thing. After the earthquake, I started to check on my loved ones and also to ask, why had this happened? I went up to Swayambhu to see Swayambhu Dhyama, a famous healer whom some of you may have known. She passed away in 2019, but I think of her every day, and I thank her for all that she taught me. Swayambhu Dhyama told me that the earthquake was a kop, meaning a punishment, from Nagraja. She said, and I quote, "People have been hurting the nags, drilling and boring into the earth for water. They have been selling water for money. That is not allowed. They paved over all the land, so there is no place for the nags to stay. They threw garbage in the rivers. People dried up all the water sources and made them filthy. But this place does not belong to us. People forgot that this place belongs to them." Nags are holy serpents associated with water. You have probably seen them represented all over this valley, including in most of the works of art you see in this exhibit. But it is hard to overstate their importance as part of the very origin of the Kathmandu Valley. Maybe you already know the story. The Kathmandu Valley used to be a lake, the abode of serpents. At that time, it was ruled by 9 Nagraja kings and Nagrani queens. When the Bodhisattva Manjushri came and drained the lake so that the human beings, plants, and animals could live here, on the richest soil on earth and the place most conducive to attaining enlightenment, it was with the consent of and by treaty with the holy nags. The serpent kings and queens had treaty rights. Lakes and ponds were set aside for them. You can still find ponds in Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur called Nag Pokri, with a golden serpent's head in the middle, rising up out of the water. The largest of these is Todaha. But not only ponds. Nags are the owners and guardians of wells, springs, stone taps, streams, and rivers. They also embody the moisture in the soil, making plants grow. Sometimes they live in people's houses, or at least visit, coming in and out of the dyatwa, or god holes, spaces intentionally built into traditional buildings. It was believed that if you made offerings and pleased the nag in your house, it would make you rich, because nags are treasure keepers. If you offend them by something as simple as urinating or spitting on a drain, they will strike back, giving you rashes and itches, boils, and infected eyes. Nags are powerful and exacting. They hate pollution. Swayambhu Dhamma said that each nag has its own unique identity and that they are as diverse as human beings. So think about that. Each well, each stream, each pond, each stone tap embodies an individual nag who is a person like you and who remembers you and experiences how you treat them, the tap or the well or the pond, each time you come to get water or wash. The nag, the water source, knows you. In the form of the nag, the water has memory, the water has emotion, the water has agency. The water wants you to treat it with respect, or it will go away in the form of drought, or punish you with floods and disease. In the paintings and sculptures of the Dyas, you often see them wearing a nag draped around their body. Swayambhu Dhyama told me that the nags that Dyas wear around their necks and waists are themselves very powerful deities, like implementers, who can make whatever they want happen. She said, quote, "The nags worn by Kumari or by Bungadya, those aren't ordinary nags. There's a great difference between a king and a commoner, and the nags who rest on Dyas are kings and queens in their own right." Unquote. According to Swayambhu Dhamma, the 9 Nag kings and 9 Nag queens were the origin not only of this Kathmandu Valley, but of the whole world. That means New York, Finland, Philadelphia, South America, Africa, the whole thing. She said, without nags, there wouldn't be anything. Dharti, the earth, would not exist. This world would not exist. There would be no plants, not one living thing. Nagaraja is the originator of water and makes the waters flow. Another thing Swayambhu Dhamma was worrying about after the earthquake was that the inner part of the temple to Santipur Acharya, whose entrance is most of the way up Swayambhu Hill, just below the stupa, had collapsed. People say that the inner temple inside the hill is connected to a series of secret tunnels that come out below on the valley floor. Precious relics are inside. Among the most powerful relic is the original treaty document with the 9 serpent kings and queens. What does the treaty look like? The treaty was a gift. The treaty was a painting of the 9 nagas. Each serpent king had drawn himself with his own blood. If ever drought afflicted the land, the Nagarajas promised, bring out the blood treaty and it will rain. Actually, there isn't an exact word in Newar for treaty, but treaty may be a useful concept in understanding how traditional Newars kept up their relationship with the other beings in their environment. Treaties imply mutual obligation. Gifts are exchanged. Ideally, the treaty allows all parties to live in harmony and even to flourish. But how do you live in harmony with non-human beings or even invisible beings? First, you recognize them and address them by name. You include them in your foundational stories about who you are. You are in this place together. You make room for them and acknowledge not only their right to space, but their sovereignty. Continually presenting gifts to the other beings, Newars made gifts to the Nags all around them by making food offerings and throwing treasures into their ponds. You acknowledge and give thanks for the gifts you receive in return. Water is a gift. You don't take what belongs to the Nags without asking first. Whenever a new well was dug or even cleaned, people offered a Chima Puja first, asking the Nags for permission and apologizing for disturbing them. Newars used to depend on the Nags' gifts, rain at the right time, enough water for everyone, and treasure in the form of full granaries and growing wealth at home. Today, people in Kathmandu are suffering a great deal from lack of water and difficulty getting it. How should this fact be interpreted? It could be that multiple explanations lead us closer to the truth. Swayambhudharma said that if people don't remember the Nags, sources of drinking water will keep drying up. I heard more than one story from Newar elders about how someone had died from disrespecting a Nag. But can a whole people die from disrespecting Nags, from forgetting the importance of the water sources necessary to not only daily life, but their religious and cultural identity? For Swayambhudharma and other Newar religious elders, earthquake and drought are forms of communication, messages, not just to an individual, but to the entire population, that a crucial relationship is being ignored. Each one of us, as an individual, bears responsibility for our relationship to water. Now, I'm going to talk about Bungadya, who is represented in some of the paintings in this exhibit. This story takes place long after the original draining of the valley and its settlement by human beings. It has Nagaraja in it, and also a Bumble Bee. It's about what the people did another time when they were in terrible trouble. It's the story of how the rainmaker god Bungadya was brought to the valley. Bungadya, whose name means the Dya of springs welling from the earth, lives half of the year in the agricultural village of Bungamati and half the year in a temple in the city of Pala. The devotion people felt and still feel for Bungadya is hard to describe. There is passionate gratitude, surges of tenderness that brings tears to people's eyes. Malini Ma, who lived in Patan near the stone taps at Sundara, told me the story of Bungadya. She too has passed away, and I miss her very, very much. I want to express my thanks to her and her family for sharing so much with me, and I was honored that some of her family members could come to the presentation last Saturday. I had heard the story of Bungadya before, because Bungadya's annual celebration is perhaps the biggest Newar festival of all, a chariot festival, or Rath Jatra, that takes months to accomplish every spring, and which has brought together more people and more places than any other. But Malini Ma's version was special. She, her daughters, and her daughters-in-law have a hereditary role in acting the story every year. It cannot happen without them. Malini Ma told me that once upon a time, long ago, the rain stopped. There was a terrible drought. The rice plants dried to husk with no milk in them, and the people were dying of hunger. A Tantric Guru from Kathmandu saw in his meditation that the Bodhisattva Bungadya had been born to a demon queen in Assam. A Bodhisattva is an enlightened being who chooses to keep being reborn out of compassion for those who are suffering. Bungadya is also known as Karunamayas, another name for Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassion. And Assam is one of the rainiest places on earth. So a party set out. The Tantric magician, the king, and Karkot Nagraja, one of the 9 serpent kings, who was a guardian of the waters in the Kathmandu Valley. When they reached Kamache in Assam, they turned Bungadya into a Bumble Bee, trapped the bee in their kalash or sacred water pot, and ran like hell before the demons knew what had happened. The instant they reached the Kathmandu Valley, carrying Bungadya, the rain began to fall, the flowers all burst into bloom, and the rice grains filled with nourishment. I asked Malini Ma, so what happened to the blood treaty of the 9 Nagrajas? She said that Goraknath, a Hindu ascetic, was sitting on it, so it couldn't work. Once Bungadya came into the valley, he stood up out of respect for the Dya, and so that's also why it rained. Now, the Tantric magician, the king, and Nagraja didn't go to Assam alone to steal Bungadya. They were accompanied by a Japu farmer whose job was to carry their things and to do the cooking with the help of his daughter, who also came. When they ran away from the demons, the daughter put the water pot containing the Bumble Bee Bodhisattva into her waist wrapping, fooling the demons by looking like an ordinary pregnant farmer or Japu. So as the demons pursued them, they said, oh, that's just a pregnant farm woman, and kept going. Didn't know it was their own Bungadya. Malini Ma's family are the descendants of the farmer and his daughter, and they have a hereditary role in Bungadya's Jatra. Bungadya's chariot festival, or Rath Jatra, which will be starting soon, is the most public form of worship of this deity, bringing her in a procession so that huge crowds can come together and worship. But the festival can't start until Bungadya is fetched away from the demons and brought to the valley once again. Every year, the Malini, who is an unmarried daughter or a married daughter-in-law of the family, goes with a small band, including a tantric priest and someone representing the king or Juju, to Kuruwal, the place to the south where the Bagmati River leaves the valley. There is a rock with Bungadya's mother's handprints in it here, at the place where she stopped, in despair, unable to catch up with her stolen child. With tantric rituals, the demons are summoned. Jasmine flowers scattered on the river infuse the water with Bungadya's life force. Then the Malini scoops up the charged river water in a sacred kalash that she keeps in her waist wrapping as they walk quickly back to Patan, past Bungamati. The holy water in the kalash is poured onto the feet of Bungadya's image, brought back to life anew, the image is lifted into the chariot, and Bungadya's festival begins. Now, what I've just told you is a greatly simplified version, both of the story and of the events that take place. But the question might be, why is it so important to repeat these rituals every year instead of just telling the story? Also, this is not just play acting. Bungadya and her gift of rain is so important that extreme care must be taken with purity rules, especially by the Malini, who is the one carrying the Dya against her own body, and with the rituals. Why does it matter so much? Why do they have to get it right? The Malini fasts for 5 days at least before going to Kuruwal to fetch Bungadya. She eats a very restricted diet with only pure foods that come from the earth. Drinking and bathing in water she draws herself from a well, sleeping separately. And she walks the whole way there and back barefoot. Others also are extremely careful. Malini Ma told me, what we do, keeping all the rules and restrictions, determines whether it actually works or not, bringing back Bungadya. And without Bungadya, nobody can live. When we all carry out our sacred obligations carefully, the Bumble Bee comes to us. A live Bumble Bee, Bumba, actually appears. And in case you're wondering, it is a live Bumble Bee. I saw it. It came, it zoomed a few circles around the Malini's head and kept going. In this way, a group representing the major actors in society, the priest, the king, the non-human or supernatural world, the farmer, and the woman farmer, take responsibility collectively for the rains coming on time, for the well-being of all. They understand that their actions have a direct effect on the weather. First, the hot and dry windy period before the monsoon, and then the monsoon itself. Malini Ma said, as we walk along, we are shutting the wind holes in the sky. We say, it's time for Bungadya's festival, okay? We don't want wind to topple over the chariot. And after the Jatra is done, when we walk back, we open up the sky doors. We open up the sky doors because now it's time for rain to flood the rice fields. It actually happens that the sun will be shining on our faces and it will be raining on our backs, that it starts raining the instant we pass by, Malini Ma said. Well, there are plenty of people in this world who don't yet accept that our collective actions have a direct effect on the weather, but these Newars knew it all along. Every year, at the end of Bungadya's festival, the head of state and government ministers gather at the foot of Bungadya's chariot for Boto Jatra. At the astrologically exact moment, the government official in charge of Newar festivals, flanked by the Bungamati priests, displays a little piece of black cloth. And I saw a kind of ratty little piece of black cloth. The honor guard fires muskets. The crowd shoves and cranes their necks to see it. Malini Ma told me to get a good look at it, because just seeing Bungadya's Boto can make your deepest wishes come true. Malini Ma's story about the Boto is the last story about Nagraja and Bungadya I'll share today. There was a farmer working in his field, wearing just his loincloth under the hot sun. And then there was Nagraja, on his way somewhere. The farmer bowed to Nagraja, "Hayatin, my lord." The Serpent King sighed. His queen had a terrible affliction in her eyes, such that she could no longer see. Nagraja had brought Vaidyas, doctors, tantrics, to cure the queen's eyes to no avail. He said to the farmer, "Maybe you can cure her. If you can cure my wife's eyes, you can have whatever you want." Nagraja was rich, with an underground palace full of treasure. The farmer said, "I can cure her, but he won't like it." Nagraja led the farmer down through the earth to his palace, where the queen was squinting, her eyes running. Despite her protests, gross, the farmer dripped some of his armpits right into the queen's eyes, and immediately she could see. She could see clearly. "What do you want?" Nagraja asked. "Take anything." The room was crammed with treasure. "Actually," the farmer said, "what I would really like is that jeweled waistcoat you're wearing." Nagraja was surprised. He thought, how did that simpleton farmer know that this is the most valuable thing I own? In low light, the vest looked just like the dull black vest worn by Japu farmers, which you can still see on elderly men of the Japu caste today. But in sunlight, it glittered and shone, sparkling like diamonds and pearls. But Nagraja had promised, so with an effort, he took his vest off and gave it to the farmer, who immediately put it on. The farmer went home and showed it off to his wife, who said, "Wow, that's awfully fancy for you, though, don't you think? Don't get it dirty. Take care of it." The farmer went back to his field to work and thought, "She's probably right," and put the vest aside on the edge of his field. While he was working, Bhutnath came along, and while the farmer's back was turned, he snatched the jeweled vest. The Bhut is like a ghost you can't see who waits at the crossroads to grab you. He's jealous. He's greedy. He doesn't like to share. He wants to grab everything for himself. He went away wearing the stolen vest, feeling high and mighty, looking like a fool. When the farmer saw that the precious Boto was gone, he was so upset he went to see Bungadya's Jatra for a while instead of going home. While he was in the crowd surrounding the chariot, or not, he spied the Bhut wearing Nagraja's vest, and he got furious. He attacked the Bhut, jumped on it, and there was a terrific fight, punching and yelling, until Nagraja himself came to see what the commotion was all about. At his order, people pulled the two fighters apart, and he took hold himself of his jeweled waistcoat. He said, "This is much too precious a thing to entrust to any single person. My jeweled vest is going to be for everyone, held as a sacred trust by Bungadya. To prove that everyone has kept the faith and guarded the treasure for all, the boto must be displayed every year at the end of Bungadya's Jatra, with the juju, or king, or now elected government, as witness. The jewels on Nagaraja's vest are like the sparkling drops of water that make all the plants grow so that every living thing can eat. Water is much too precious to entrust to any individual, especially not to a brute or a corporation, to the forces of greed, who think water, which is necessary to all life, can be owned, can be bought, can be sold. Instead, it is a sacred trust to be guarded for the benefit of all by the government. Newars treated water as something sacred and alive, not as an inert substance to be used, nor property to be owned, so that one person can waste it while another person has none. So they turned water and rainfall and even the climate in the form of the monsoon into a series of personal relationships to be kept up. They took responsibility for maintaining those relationships on every level. An individual would be responsible to and for the water they took from a tap or a well. A community would be responsible to maintain wells and ponds and taps. The rulers would be responsible for overseeing the whole system, including the climate, and making sure water stayed accessible to all. So you may all know that in recent years, there are rivers that have been granted legal personhood, most notably the Te Awa Tupua River in New Zealand, which is considered the living ancestor and creator of some of the Maori people. This is part of a larger movement worldwide to convert different bodies of water, forests, and other parts of nature from property that can be owned to legal persons who can have their rights defended in court. With climate change threatening our very existence, changing the way we view and treat water is truly important. We don't have a moment to lose. And here are our Newar traditions showing us how to do just that, how to treat water with the reverence it deserves. Malidima and her children were incredibly kind to me and welcomed me into their home and welcomed my interest. So now that we've been talking about water, I'd just like to say a final word about all the Newar people who do the hard ritual jobs that keep this culture going. And sometimes we don't understand what it is that they're doing, but they're doing it on behalf of all of us. So Malidima and her children were incredibly kind to me and welcomed me into their home and welcomed my interest in the work they do for Bungadya. But one of them once asked me, "What's the good of learning about our culture? You and other foreign researchers come, but we still don't get support from our own society." And it is true that fewer and fewer people in the Kathmandu Valley understand or respect the very difficult and complex ritual jobs the Malini's family and other Newars are doing without any kind of adequate compensation. You know, they can't have other difficult jobs, they can't have high-paying jobs or go out because they are doing this. And they do it despite the fact that it costs them both money and missed opportunities to earn more, because they know their duty, that the work that they do is crucial to keeping the world alive for everyone. And these people deserve our thanks and respect, but they also deserve our support. And here I'm just saying, if there's some modern way that we need to think as a culture to get our heads together to support these people, both individual donations and pressure for the government and international bodies to endow the gutis again with money that was taken away from them. This intangible cultural heritage is just as important as the temples and monuments that we hold so dear here, to remind the world of a different, more beautiful way of living.